Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the most, let's say, mysterious but also incredibly powerful concepts in all of finance: continuing value. It's that single, almost magical number that's supposed to capture a company's entire future, from year 10 all the way out to, well, forever. So let's just start with the biggest question right off the bat, a question that feels almost philosophical. How in the world do you value a company forever? I mean, it seems impossible, doesn't it? It's like trying to predict what the weather will be like 1,000 years from now. But here's the really clever solution. You don't actually have to predict every single year from now until the end of time. No. Instead, you make the problem manageable. You split a company's life into two parts. First, you have the explicit forecast period. That's where you build a super detailed year-by-year financial model. And then you have the continuing value period, which captures everything else, all of that future, in one single number. Okay, so that begs the question, how do we actually calculate that forever value? It's not just pulled out of thin air. Thankfully, there's a recommended, and I gotta say, a very elegant tool for the job. And there it is. This is the key value driver formula. Now, I know it might look a little intense at first, but trust me, this is widely seen as the most economically sound way to figure out continuing value. It beautifully ties together a company's future profits, its growth prospects, and crucially, the returns it's going to generate on any new investments. Now, let's zoom in on one really important part of that formula, RONIC. This isn't your average return on investment. This is the return on new invested capital. And this concept, right here, is the absolute key to understanding whether a company's future growth is actually going to create any value. It answers the most critical question. When the company spends new money, is it earning more than that money costs? Or is it just getting bigger for the sake of getting bigger? RONIC tells us that story. To really use this formula the right way, we first have to clear out some of the fog. There are these common, and frankly pretty costly, misunderstandings about what continuing value is and what it isn't. Okay, myth number one. You'd think, pretty logically, that if you forecast for 15 years instead of just 5, you'd get a totally different, maybe more precise valuation. I mean, more detail should equal a better answer, right? Well, that feels right, but it's actually a classic trap. And this chart just perfectly shows why that gut feeling is wrong. Just take a look. Each one of these bars is a different forecast length, 5 years, 10 years, all the way out to 20. But what's the one thing you notice about the total height of each bar? It never changes. The company's total value stays exactly the same every single time, $893 million. So here's the big takeaway. The length of your detailed forecast, it doesn't actually change the company's underlying value. All it does is change how you label the pieces of that value. A longer forecast just moves some of the value from that big, hazy, continuing value bucket over to the more detailed, explicit forecast bucket. The total pie is still the same size. All right, on to myth number 2. This is a big one. It's the belief that at the exact moment your detailed forecast ends, let's say it's on December 31st of year 10, poof, all of the company's competitive advantages, its brand, its patents, all that good stuff, it just vanishes into thin air. But come on, we know that's not how the real world works. Business isn't a cartoon. This chart shows what really happens. The company's overall returns, they tend to fade, sure, but they fade gradually as competitors try to chip away at their success. There is no sudden cliff. It's more like a slow, gentle slope. It's like an athlete getting older. They might not be as fast as they were in their prime, but they don't just suddenly forget how to compete. So the really important distinction to make here is between new money and old money. The profits that a company makes from its already successful stores or its hit products, they don't just disappear. Finding brand new high-return projects might get tougher over time, but the cash that the existing successful parts of the business are generating can keep flowing for a very, very long time. And all of this leads to a moment of real frustration for a lot of executives. They look at the final valuation model, and they see that maybe 80%, sometimes even more, of their company's total value is tied up in this one single abstract number. And they just throw their hands up and say, what's the point? All the value is in the continuing value. It feels like all that detailed work for the first 10 years hardly even matters. But hang on. This is where a simple change in perspective can make all the difference. Look at these two charts. They represent the exact same total value, just framed in two different ways. On the left, yeah, it looks like most of the value is some big gamble on the distant future. But now, look at the chart on the right. When we reframe it, we see that a massive 74% of the company's value actually comes from the steady, predictable cash flows of its existing base business. That uncertain future growth, it's really just a small piece of the pie. So the real story here is that continuing value isn't just some big, scary number about a future we can't possibly know. A huge chunk of it is simply reflecting the value of the durable, cash-producing business that the company has already built. It's not a fantasy about the future. It's a reflection of today's reality, just projected forward. Okay, so now that we've busted those big myths, let's get practical. Let's look at two common kind of in-the-weeds mistakes that people often make when they're actually building these forecasts. So the first pitfall has this really fancy name, erroneous base year extrapolation. But honestly, the idea behind it is pretty simple. It's when forecasters make a small but very significant mistake about how much cash a company needs for its day-to-day operations, that's its working capital, as its overall growth starts to slow down. And just look at the massive difference this one little mistake can make. The incorrect method, the common mistake, understates the company's free cash flow in year 11 by almost 18%. That's a huge error. The correct way recognizes a very simple truth. As your growth slows down, you don't need to tie up as much new cash in things like inventory, and that means more cash is freed up for investors. Now, the second common pitfall is pretty much the exact opposite of wishful thinking. It's being too conservative. And while that might sound like a good thing, it can be just as misleading as being way too optimistic. Think about businesses with these incredibly powerful, durable competitive advantages, the Coca-Colas, the PepsiCos of the world. It is a huge mistake to just assume that all of their advantages are going to vanish overnight. I mean, their brands, their distribution networks, those things create massive walls that are really hard for competitors to climb. If you assume their returns are just going to immediately plummet, you will systematically and drastically undervalue these great companies. So after busting some myths and dodging a few pitfalls, let's just zoom back out for a second. What does this all really mean? What's the big idea we should be walking away with here? I think this chart really does sum it all up perfectly. At the end of the day, continuing value isn't a prediction. It's not fortune-telling. It's a model of a fundamental, powerful, and absolutely relentless economic truth. In a competitive market, high profits will always attract competition, and that competition will always gradually push those returns back down toward the average. Continuing value is just our best tool for modeling that reality. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. We should probably stop thinking of continuing value as some kind of crystal ball trying to predict a foggy, distant future. It's much more useful to think of it as a mirror that reflects the true durability and strength of a company's competitive advantage as it exists, right here, today.